When powerful tech CEO Adrian Chase is ditched by his fake fiancée just an hour before the most important deal of his life, he turns in desperation to Grace Nolan, a quiet temp with a mysterious past and a fragile heart. Adrian Chase, 34, sharp-suited and razor-tempered, stood glaring at his phone in the towering penthouse of Skytech's headquarters. His entire empire, valued at billions, rested on today's family gathering. A partnership with European investors hinged not just on his brilliance, but his image of stability, which meant arriving with a fiancée. Jessica, the socialite he'd paid to fill that role, had bailed, via text, less than 60 minutes before showtime. Grace Nolan, 26, with soft brown eyes, warm cocoa-toned skin, a petite frame hidden under an oversized cardigan, was just there to deliver printouts. Her chestnut hair was in a Bessie bun, and her voice barely above a whisper. She had no idea she was walking into a storm. Adrian's eyes landed on her. Something about her quiet presence calmed the panic clawing at his throat. "You," he said, pointing. "Do you want $10,000 to be my fiancé for a day?" She blinked, stunned. "Excuse me, no time." "Say yes, I'll explain in the car." And just like that, Grace was pulled into a world of wealth, lies, and a heart that would soon beat wildly for reasons no money could buy. Grace sat stiffly in the back seat of Adrian's black town car, staring at the diamond ring now glinting on her left hand. She hadn't even said yes. Not really. She'd mumbled something about needing to finish filing, and the next thing she knew, a stylist had been summoned, a dress selected, and a necklace fastened around her neck. Adrian, ever composed, tapped away on his phone. "You'll just smile, nod, call me darling once or twice. Keep it simple." Grace swallowed hard. "I don't even know your middle name. You won't need it. Just stick to the script." He handed her a printed sheet, a summary of their supposed relationship, first date, favorite wine, her nickname for him. She barely had time to blink before they pulled up to a grand estate surrounded by manicured gardens and luxury cars. The deal was clear: 1 day of pretending, 1 day of lies, and $10,000 in her account by nightfall. But inside, Grace's chest ached, not just from nerves. She had a heart condition, congenital, undiagnosed until last year. Time was slipping away, and this pretend love story felt like a strange, beautiful way to borrow one more moment of life. Evelyn Whitmore, Adrian's 82-year-old grandmother, sat in a wheelchair at the center of the ballroom like a queen on her throne. Her white curls were pinned, her gown elegant, but her cheeks were pale. Everyone whispered about her health. "She's holding on for the engagement," someone muttered behind Grace as they entered the room. Adrian's grip on Grace's hand tightened. "Smile. Now." Grace plastered on the best version of confidence she could manage, feeling painfully out of place in a borrowed silk dress and heels that pinched. But when Evelyn saw her, something in the old woman's eyes softened. "Well, aren't you lovely?" Evelyn whispered as Grace knelt beside her. "And he told me he'd never love again." Grace blinked. She reminds me of your mother, Adrian," Evelyn added. "She has that same warmth." Adrian, caught off guard, said nothing. Grace, however, felt something stir. Not just fear, not just the performance, but a strange connection. Evelyn looked at her not with suspicion, but hope. The moment passed and guests swarmed them, congratulating, questioning, praising. But it was Evelyn's soft smile Grace would remember. By the time dessert was served, Grace had been asked about wedding venues, honeymoon plans, and even baby names. She smiled, she laughed, she lied. Adrian, ever composed, played his role flawlessly. To outsiders he looked smitten, brushing a stray curl behind her ear, holding her hand beneath the table. But Grace noticed how calculated it all was. Every touch was timed, every smile rehearsed. Still, when their eyes met between courses, something shifted. There was a flicker of sincerity, of a man who wasn't as cold as he pretended. After the event, back in the car, Grace let out a breath she hadn't realized she'd been holding. "You were good," Adrian said quietly. "Better than I expected." "I was terrified," she admitted. His eyes lingered on her. "You didn't show it." For a moment they sat in silence. The night should have ended there. But when Evelyn requested a full engagement ceremony before the month's end, Adrian didn't hesitate. "We'll do it." Grace stared at him. You've started something," he said, a shadow of a smile playing on his lips. "Now we have to finish it." Days passed in a blur. Grace was fitted for gowns, prepped by publicists, and paraded before cameras. Each moment she reminded herself, this isn't real. But her heart betrayed her. During a quiet evening in the guest suite of Adrian's home, she sat beside Evelyn again, reading aloud from a poetry book. "You love him," Evelyn said gently. Grace froze. "It's just pretend," Evelyn shook her head. "You're a poor liar, dear, and I know what I see." Grace hesitated. She didn't want to lie to this kind woman, but the truth felt even more dangerous. "I have a heart condition," she confessed. "I've been waiting for a transplant. The doctors say it could be months or too late." Evelyn reached out, her frail fingers warm against Grace's wrist. Then don't waste a second. Even pretend love can become real. That night, Grace lay in bed staring at the ceiling. What had started as a charade now felt like something else. A fragile, blooming hope that maybe, just maybe, someone like her could be loved after all. Adrian sat in his home office late into the night, staring at a photo snapped during the party. Grace smiling beside Evelyn, her head tilted slightly. Laughter caught mid-moment. Something about her expression haunted him. She wasn't supposed to matter. He had built his life on control, structure, outcomes. Feelings were liabilities. His last real relationship had ended in betrayal, and ever since he'd kept everything, especially people, at arm's length. But Grace was different. She asked nothing, demanded nothing, and yet she felt like a storm on the horizon, unpredictable and stirring things inside him he thought he'd buried for good. The next morning, over breakfast in the sun-drenched kitchen, Grace poured coffee for both of them. She wore a faded sweater and no makeup. Her hair was still damp from the shower, and there was a vulnerability to her that made it impossible to look away. "I told your grandmother the truth," she said softly, not meeting his eyes. Adrian's brow furrowed. "About what?" "My condition." Silence. Then he reached across the table and covered her hand with his. "If I had known," Grace shook her head. "It's not your responsibility." But something shifted between them in that moment. Something real. And Adrian realized with quiet dread that this arrangement might not be so simple to walk away from after all. The day of the charity gala arrived, another public appearance where the fake couple had to shine. Grace, now more polished from weeks of coaching, glided through the crowd in a pale blue gown that shimmered like water. Her heart fluttered, not from her condition, but from the way Adrian looked at her when she entered the room. He was in a tailored black tux, his expression unreadable, but his eyes followed her like gravity. "You look," he began but didn't finish. Instead, he offered his arm, and together they stepped into the spotlight. Midway through the night, under the guise of pleasing the donors, someone called out, "Kiss her, Adrian." The crowd laughed and clapped. Adrian turned to her. "We don't have to." Grace reached up and kissed him. It started light, a performance, but something happened between them, something electric and unspoken, and the kiss deepened, lingering longer than it should have. When they pulled apart, the crowd cheered. But neither Adrian nor Grace heard them. Their eyes locked, breathing uneven. That kiss didn't feel fake, and both of them knew it. Grace collapsed in the dressing room after the gala. The lights blurred, her chest tightened. She sank to the floor, gasping as her heart betrayed her once again. Adrian burst in minutes later, having been summoned by her panicked assistant. The sight of her on the floor, fragile and pale, shattered something inside him. He lifted her gently, holding her close as medics rushed in. At the hospital, he paced the hallway like a man possessed. When the doctor emerged, he barely let him speak. "She needs a transplant," the doctor said. "Soon." Adrian sat in the waiting room long after visiting hours ended, staring at the vending machine but seeing nothing. For the first time in years, he felt powerless. This wasn't just about a deal or an arrangement anymore. Grace was not a contract. She was the woman he couldn't imagine losing. Grace awoke to find Adrian sitting beside her hospital bed, dark circles under his eyes, his usual armor gone. "I told you," she whispered weakly. "I'm not someone you should get attached to." Adrian reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a small velvet box. "This was supposed to be fake," he said, voice cracking. "But somewhere along the way it became the only thing in my life that felt real." He opened the box. A ring, but not the same one from before. This one was simple, elegant, chosen for her. "I don't care if we only have days or decades," he said. "I want them with you." Grace blinked back tears. "You're serious?" "I've never been more sure of anything." Her answer was a whispered yes, and this time their engagement wasn't for show. It was for forever, however long that might be. Back at the estate, Evelyn sat in the garden, sun hat shading her eyes. When Grace and Adrian returned to share their news, she smiled so wide it lit up her entire face. "I knew," she said simply. They told her everything, the collapse, the proposal, the truth about Grace's health. Evelyn listened quietly, then reached for Grace's hand. "You gave me something I hadn't felt in a long time. Hope," she said. "You brought him back to life, my dear." She turned to Adrian. "Take care of her, with everything you have. Don't waste love by holding it back." That evening they sat together as a family. No cameras, no lies, just laughter, memories, and warmth. And for the first time Grace let herself dream, not just of surviving but of living, really living, not as a pretend fiancé, but as someone who was finally, completely, truly loved. The engagement might have started as fiction, but the wedding plans were now heartbreakingly real. Adrian surprised everyone when he insisted on moving the engagement ceremony forward. "We don't know how long we have," he told the planner. "We're not waiting for perfection, we're celebrating now." Grace was overwhelmed. She had spent her life being invisible, overlooked, dispensable. Now she stood in the center of a whirlwind of florists, gown designers, and caterers, everyone suddenly calling her Miss Nolan. She chose a modest yet graceful dress, ivory silk with delicate lace sleeves. She smiled through fittings and tastings, but when she was alone, she'd clutch her chest and feel the fragile rhythm of her heart, a reminder that time was not guaranteed. Adrian meanwhile canceled meetings, postponed projects, and cleared his calendar just to sit with her in the garden or take her to lunch, or watch her laugh when his grandmother told stories from the 1960s. It was the softest season of his life. He, who had once calculated everything, was now living hour to hour, just grateful she was still beside him. The ceremony wasn't for show anymore. It was a prayer whispered in flowers, music, and vows, for love and for time. Just 3 days before the engagement ceremony, the call came. A donor heart had been found. It was compatible, the hospital was ready, but it came with no guarantees. The surgery was risky. The waitlist rules meant they had to act fast. Grace sat in Adrian's study, trembling. "If I go now, I might not come back." Adrian knelt in front of her, gently cupping her face. "And if you don't go, you definitely won't." "I wanted one more day," she whispered. "One more with you, one more with Evelyn." Adrian pressed his forehead to hers. "You'll have hundreds more. Thousands." They packed a small bag, kissed Evelyn goodbye, and drove in silence to the hospital. The ceremony would have to wait, but their love couldn't. It had already taken root, wild, deep, and brave. As Grace was wheeled into surgery, she looked back at Adrian and mouthed something only he could see: "I love you." The surgery lasted over 7 hours. Adrian didn't sit. He paced, called the doctors, stared at the door, spoke to no one. Evelyn had offered to come, but he'd asked her to stay home. He didn't want her to see him like this. For the first time in his life, Adrian felt utterly out of control. He remembered Grace laughing at a joke he made about her cooking. He remembered her falling asleep with her hand in his. He remembered how she looked when she thought no one was watching, hopeful, afraid, radiant. He hadn't just fallen for her. He had built his whole future around her. When the surgeon finally emerged, Adrian stood frozen. "She made it," the doctor said. He didn't realize he'd dropped to his knees until the nurse gently helped him up. Grace had made it, and so had he. 2 months later, on a cool spring morning, a car pulled up to the front of the Whitmore estate. Grace stepped out slowly, thinner than before, still recovering, but with a glow in her cheeks and strength in her step. Evelyn wept quietly on the porch. Adrian stood frozen for a beat. Then he ran to her. She dropped her bag just in time to fall into his arms. "I missed you," she whispered. "You came back," he said against her hair. "You came home." That afternoon, no press, no performance. They held a private ceremony in the garden. Just Evelyn, Adrian, Grace, and their vows. She wore the same ivory gown. He wore the same smile he hadn't worn since childhood. They exchanged rings, not as strangers pretending, but as two people who had walked through fear, loss, and time, and still found each other standing on the other side. Grace had a new heart beating in her chest, but the biggest change was the one she felt in her soul. She had spent her life preparing for the end. Now, for the first time, she was daring to plan for the beginning. Adrian built her a painting studio in the greenhouse. Evelyn helped plant a wildflower garden in Grace's name. The three of them spent weekends cooking, laughing, and living. She no longer felt like the temp worker pretending to be someone else. She was Grace Nolan Chase now. The woman who had changed a man with walls of steel into someone who kissed her hand every morning like it was the first time. And though her heart still bore the scars of surgery, it beat with purpose, because she had found her home, not in the house, not in the ceremony, but in Adrian. As spring bled into summer, Grace found herself waking each morning with a serenity she had never known. Adrian brought her tea in bed, a tradition he insisted on starting during her recovery. Evelyn, stronger than ever, often called Grace the miracle we didn't deserve but were lucky to receive. Their quiet life in the countryside estate was far from the boardrooms and city lights Adrian had once called home. One afternoon, while the garden bloomed in a riot of lavender and roses, Adrian took Grace by the hand and led her to the bench where they had once sat pretending to be engaged. "No more pretending," he said. He knelt for the second time. "Marry me. Not because we're playing a role, not because it fulfills a contract or anyone's expectations. Marry me because every day without you is a day I don't want." Grace's breath caught in her throat. She touched the faint scar above her chest, the one that marked the second chance she'd been given. "I will," she said, voice trembling. "I will. For as many days as I get, I'll be yours." The wedding was nothing like the engagement party. No flashing cameras, no corporate stakeholders, no media buzz, just 50 guests, strings of soft lights in the garden, wildflowers handpicked by Evelyn. And Grace, radiant in a flowing white dress with sleeves of embroidered tulle, her hair in soft waves, her eyes glowing with life. Adrian stood waiting beneath an arched trellis, his dark suit perfectly pressed, his heart no longer guarded. Vows were exchanged in whispers, not rehearsed, not written by a PR team, but raw, vulnerable, honest. "I was a fortress," Adrian said, "and you walked in, not to destroy, but to live inside." Grace blinked back tears. "I thought my time was short, but you made me want more. And with you I'll keep reaching for tomorrow." When they kissed, the guests rose in applause. Evelyn wiped away a tear, and the sun poured gold across the garden like a blessing. Married life didn't erase their differences, but it enriched them. Grace, ever grounded, began hosting art workshops for children with long-term illnesses. Adrian, newly introspective, reduced his corporate commitments and invested in medical philanthropy. They traveled. They learned to argue and make up. They cooked, badly at first, and spent nights stargazing from their balcony, wrapped in blankets and dreams. Every anniversary, Adrian would whisper, "Thank you for saying yes when I was a fool who didn't know what love looked like." And Grace would smile, placing his hand over her chest. "You gave me more heart than I ever had." Evelyn lived long enough to witness the birth of their daughter, whom they named Hope, because that's what Grace had given them all. Years passed. Adrian and Grace were no longer the scandalous fake couple the tabloids once followed. They became a story whispered by those who still believed in miracles. The mogul who fell for a girl with a ticking clock. The temp who changed the course of an empire. Grace published a memoir titled Borrowed Time, Eternal Love. It became a bestseller, not for its drama, but for its honesty, for the reminder that love isn't measured in years, it's measured in depth. Their daughter Hope grew up among flowers, poetry, and stories of a woman who once wore a borrowed dress and captured the heart of a man who thought he'd never feel again. Their love became legend, not because it was perfect, but because it was real. One quiet evening, Adrian and Grace sat together on the same bench where everything began. The estate had grown more beautiful with time. Their daughter's laughter echoed in the distance, and the sky painted itself in shades of amber and lavender. "Do you ever think about how it all started?" Grace asked, resting her head on his shoulder. Adrian chuckled. "You mean the bribe in the office and the oversized cardigan?" She laughed. "Exactly." He kissed the top of her head. "I think about it every day, because that was the day my life began." The wind carried the scent of wildflowers. The sun dipped below the hills, and as twilight settled around them, Grace closed her eyes and listened to the rhythm of the heart inside her chest, the one that now beat not just for survival, but for love, forever love. If this story touched your heart, don't forget to hit that subscribe button for more unforgettable love stories filled with hope, redemption, and miracles. Because sometimes the best stories begin with a lie and end in a lifetime of truth.